Hey there, and welcome back to the Complicated Kids podcast. I'm your host, Gabrielle Nicolay, toddler whisperer, speech therapist, parent coach. And today I am joined by Daniela Owen. Daniela, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much.
So you are a clinical psychologist, but I'm going to let you tell the people like what you do, who you are, and all that.
Sure, absolutely. So, yes, you're right. I'm a clinical psychologist. I specialize in working with children and adolescents and their families. But I also wear a few different hats. So, in addition to doing clinical work, I supervise grad students at UC Berkeley, and I get to be a part of their clinical psych department, which is so cool because I was an undergrad in that psych department. So, that was where I kind of grew up originally in the world of psych. I'm also a children's book author. I've written two series that have a mental health bend towards teaching kids some strategies and concepts around mental health, but they're made for a wide audience, everyone, so that kids everywhere can get these books. And I do a little of a lot of other things. I do a little bit of teaching here and there and sit on some committees, as I'm sure you do
Yeah.
the same, just kind of get involved in all the stuff.
Yeah. And the reason we're here today, which I'm so excited about, honestly, because is because of the books. And I came across one of your books recently at my brother's house, actually, and I found it so excellent in a way that many children's books are not. um, and especially children's books that try to deal with emotional stuff and emotional intelligence and social emotional learning and all of those good things. So I'm like jumping out of my seat to have this conversation with you. But I want to know from you first, like, why did you write these books? And you said you have two series, so I'm aware of the emotion series, but tell us about both.
Right. So I started with this book, Right Now I'm Fine. And actually, the Genesis story is the start of the pandemic. We were all in lockdown. And I, as I'm sure you were feeling as a clinician, oh my gosh, I need to help more people, more kids out there. There's so much going on. There's so much distress. What can I do? So I wrote this PDF document. I am not an illustrator. I did not illustrate these. They would be little line drawings. I connected up with an illustrator and created this PDF document. And I sent it out to every listserv I was a part of and just said, spread the word, please send this, get this out into the hands of kids, how to handle this kind of situation. And then fortunately, it got into the hands of my then publisher, who reached out and said, this is great. The world needs this. And I was a little hesitant at first. I was like, well, I really just want to give it away. And he said, you will reach so many more people if we turn this into a real book and sell it. I said, fine, that's my goal. My goal is to get this into the hands of kids, so let's do that. So we partnered, we turned it into a series, and then we wrote a second series that really called out specific emotions, anxiety, sadness, and anger, and focused on how to help kids handle those feelings.
It's so well done. And I'll tell you the reason why, and then you can talk about clinically why this is a good idea. You're very specific about two things. One is everybody has felt these feelings. And the other one is they have physical reality in your body. Can you sort of talk either one or both of those things?
Absolutely. So you're completely correct. That was part of why and how I wrote the books. The first thing in every single one of my books is validation. And this is one of the things, that we need to do with kids all the time is validate them. And honestly, as parents and clinicians, when we validate someone else's experience, it's actually good for us, the validator too, right? Because we're like, oh yeah, that is true. We all do get angry. And so we're joining with the child rather than it being something like this is a problem, right? Even if it is a problem and we're going to help them handle it, we start by joining, we start by validating, we start by acknowledging that this is real. And I always say to kids, there is no such thing as a wrong feeling because there isn't. What we do with our feelings can be right and wrong. They're after the behavioral response, but the feeling itself comes from what's going on inside, comes from the environment around us, and those feelings are always correct. So all of them start with validation. Yeah.
It's but it's such an important point that you're making. And I think you've made it very well. And there's a difference between validation and emotion, which is an internal experience, and then somebody acknowledging that internal experience, and your behavior, which is hitting, crying, screaming, doing whatever, right? Where we can always, 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 as parents, acknowledge feelings, because there are no bad, wrong feelings, just like there are no bad, wrong kids.
Right.
And then we get to have a conversation afterwards about like what to do about hitting, kicking, screaming, biting, all of those things, which are can be problematic, but also maybe not problems. Right? So, okay, validation, first part of this book series.
Right. And can I say one more thing on
Please.
validation? Because it's such an important topic.
Yeah.
Sometimes parents will say to me things like, well, but it's not okay, or I don't agree with this emotion, or they shouldn't be angry. And it's like, well, they should be angry because that's what they're feeling in this moment. And you can validate an emotion without validating other aspects like the kicking, biting, and screaming, or something maybe that preceded the emotion, right? Well, if you didn't do this, then you wouldn't be feeling that way. That's okay. You can still validate the emotion without validating the other pieces. And so I think that's a really important thing for us all to understand together, because that helps parents connect with kids. And it's okay if you don't connect with them about the other pieces of the puzzle, right? But that piece is something that you can always connect with a child. You can always understand. We've all felt angry, so you can always understand what it feels like to be angry. You can always understand what it feels like to be disappointed. So that's where that point of connection can always happen.
It's so hard as parents. You're a parent, I'm a parent, to watch your child struggle through a difficult emotion. And it comes from such a good place, right? Like we want to make it okay. So we want to skip the part where we have to like acknowledge that this has happened. And we want to go right to the part where there's daisies and rainbows again. What I hear you saying is, no, pause, stop, be in the validation for a second, because that actually, and we teach this in our Raising Orchid Kids classes all the time, that's going to get you to rainbows and daisies a whole lot quicker than not taking that step.
Totally. And sometimes it gets you even more than the daisies and rainbows, right? Sometimes when you pause and say, I get why you would be feeling angry, something unexpected happens, and your child will off because they're being heard and they're not being chastised in that moment. Sometimes they will offer something about what happened that gives you a greater insight. Oh, excuse me, that will give you a greater insight than you were expecting and can help you go from there in a way that's very effective. So it can sometimes even be more, at the least, it's joining and acknowledging those emotions are real. At an even higher level, it can get you more than that. So,
and enough of those early in childhood will get you more openness, conversation, relationship when your kids get older, and are older teens now. That those lines of communication are formed when they're 2 and 3 and 4.
Yeah.
So.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So we want to talk to your second piece. Yes. Do you want me to answer that piece? So it was about the feeling in your body. And I included this, and I'm so glad you picked up on this, but you work with toddlers, so you're so aware of this. But, a lot of time we feel our emotions in our body. And a lot of times kids, and especially younger kids, that's how you hear about the emotion, especially anxiety will come out as my tummy hurts, it's hard to breathe, I'm feeling uncomfortable. And there's the physical piece of it, which they are actually truly feeling, right? When we feel anxious, our sympathetic nervous system gets activated, and all these physical changes happen in our body on purpose. So if there is danger, they can help us stay safe. But little kids notice those things, and sometimes that's how they're able to communicate about it. So again, I included that both to validate, but also to help give families and educators a common language of, what does this feel like? This may be anxiety, this may be anger, this may be sadness, right? Because that's what that feels like in our bodies.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because that too, people are like, well, it's just whatever. It's you're only having a feeling. Well, yes, it's only a feeling, but also that feeling has, as you say, physical corollaries in the body. It has hormonal and systemic nervous system reality in the body. Like this is the greatest news of all time, actually, because it means that, I mean, it gets complicated because someone else is having the experience and you are not. So there's
Right.
that piece of it, right, where we have to kind of figure out what's happening. But also it means that we can change our physical state and have a different reality too, which I can't remember right now if the I Am Fine book goes into that, but I think it kind of does. It's like this will resolve and you will be somewhere else, right? Um, and that's super
Exactly.
interesting to me too, just as a process. Like right now, and I love the title. The title is so good. It's like right now, I am fine. It's like it says it all for me.
Yeah.
So, okay, the other books, which I have not read, I have read I Am Fine, deal with specific sort of signature emotions. Can you talk a little bit? I think people don't like anger and they're uncomfortable with anger, but it's like anger doesn't feel, at least in kids, often it doesn't feel like the most dangerous thing. For me, the thing I hear most about is anxiety. Like my kid has anxiety, and like that's a big problem. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's what so this one is everyone feels anxious sometimes. Everyone feels sad sometimes. Everyone feels angry sometimes. And so these books also start out with validation. And there's a page that says, even though it doesn't feel good to feel anxious, everyone feels anxious sometimes. Because at its root, and I'm glad you said anxiety is a big problem, that's only one side of it, right? That's when we're getting a bunch of false alarm messages that we're responding to. But at its root, anxiety is our body's alarm system. It's what keeps us safe. Without anxiety, we're not responding to true threats of danger in a way that's keeping us safe, and we're actually putting ourselves at risk. So anxiety can be a problem, and it can also be great. It can be life-saving. So I think it's important to acknowledge that right off the bat. And that's one of the things that I talk to about parents and kids is we need anxiety. We cannot turn off your anxiety. I cannot teach you how to stop anxiety. All we can do is learn how to manage it, right? So the first step to managing anxiety is identifying true alarms from false alarms. When is this something that we need to be paying attention to? And when is this something that's uncomfortable but not dangerous? And when something is uncomfortable but not dangerous, we don't have to pay attention to it. We can just ride out that emotion till it quiets down in our body. And there are other things that we can do, as you mentioned, that can help it quiet down. And then there are other things that we can do that can help our minds shift so that we're not stuck in those anxious thoughts. As you said, it comes with physical responses in our body. It comes with thoughts in our minds. And so if we know it's a false alarm, this isn't something dangerous, it's just uncomfortable, what can I do about that? And that's sort of what the book then goes on to do. And that was really, to tell you my root, what I wanted to do in creating mainstream children's books with a mental health angle is we are all anxious, we are all angry, we are all sad, we are all scared, we have all of these emotions. And there are some really great books out there, and you find them in therapists' offices, right? You don't find them on the bookshelf of your local bookstore, Barnes and Nobles, on the Amazon landing page, right? And there's this thing that it's like, well, we're not matching up these really important validating messages with our audience, every kid, right? And so what I was delighted to see before I wrote these books was the children's literature is more and more validating emotion. There's more and more, you're going to feel this way sometimes. It's okay to feel this way. But then what I felt like was lacking and what I sought to do, it actually in both series, was to give kids and their parents and educators and other caregivers not only an understanding and a language for these emotions, but then what can I do? Right. And that's where I felt like other books in the children's literature, mainstream children's literature, stopped short. So they would validate emotions, so important, delighted to see that, especially as a clinical psychologist, but then didn't really give any specific ideas of what can I do now that I'm feeling that way because I'm uncomfortable and I don't like it. And that's really what these books sought to kind of pick up and take that next step further.
I
And
love
so
that. I want to talk about, we're going to jump into mindfulness, I suspect, in just a second. For the lots of kids that we see at Raising Orchid Kids, for example, these are kids whose nervous systems are wired to perceive danger where none exists. So their internal reality is of a very dangerous world. And so some of what you're talking about, most of what you're talking about for most kids is going to be manageable. In other words, I feel anxious. I don't need to feel anxious. I can recognize that at a certain point, and I can start to deal with that. For orchid kids, sometimes because their neurology is wired so very sensitively, that override is hard to come by. And it really does feel like, so if you asked that kid, is this a big deal or a little deal? They would tell you it's a very big deal. And so the reason I call it out is because I'm sure you would say this the same thing. We got to meet kids where they are. So
yes, and there is a difference. So you're right. The books were really written for neurotypical kids and can be used with neurodivergent populations with some modifications, right? So, I've worked with really highly sensitive kids. Literally, as you're saying, their nervous systems are programmed slightly differently. And so really, they are hearing sounds louder, right? So of course, we all jump it. I mean, I have like one of those hair trigger systems where, a loud sound that I jump, I startle. We all can hear that to some degree, but if your hearing is kind of turned up, even sounds that to other people are not distressing are going to be distressing to you. So then we just have to, as you're saying, meet them where they are and make some combination of things, right? So we might be using noise dampening headphones in certain circumstances and then using some of the concepts in the book. Whereas for a neurotypical kid, we don't necessarily need the noise dampening headphones. We just need them to realize that loud sound isn't dangerous. But if you're really hearing it louder, we want to acknowledge that too. That's part of the validation, right? Or if you're just more sensitive and you feel things stronger, you want to recognize that. That's important.
That's so great. I love what you just said. Exactly. And that's a whole other conversation about neurodivergence and what those brains are doing and how they're perceiving the world. And but I love what you said about, right, these books are written for neurotypical kids, can absolutely be used with neurodivergent children with some modifications. It's like perfect for me. Thank you for that. Okay, so turns out, I saw on your website, mindfulness is has a lot of tools for kids in these scenarios. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So really, when we're feeling any of these big emotions, for the most part, we're not very present right now, right? When we think about anxiety, for the most part, we are thinking ahead and worrying about what's coming. So we're in the future. A lot of times when we're feeling sad, we're ruminating on something that happened. We're thinking back and reflecting and being upset about what happened, or angry, same thing. Not really right now, right? And that's where right now I'm fine comes from, right? So a lot of this is about how do we get back into our present bodies and use our senses once we've acknowledged that there isn't danger. And that is the first step, right? I would never want a child in an actually dangerous situation to say, this isn't dangerous, it's just uncomfortable. No, if there's actually danger, that's why we need that alarm to go off. Look around, pay attention. Is there anything dangerous? Once the coast is clear, or a trusted adult has told you, we're okay, this is okay, that's when we can get into coping. And some of the coping mechanisms, as pointed out, are mindfulness mechanisms or come from mindfulness, right? So being able to use our vision and look around, it's kind of like playing a game of I Spy with yourself. Looking for things that are your favorite color around the room will help your mind focus on something else. And that focusing on something else is just attention grabbing enough that it tends to let you let go of the worry thought and kind of get a break from that worry moment. And sometimes that break is enough for us to move on. It's just enough to cool down from the anger. It's just enough to calm down from the anxiety. to be able to move on, or listening, using one's ears. And again, we want to be mindful of neurodivergence and neurotypicality when we're in this situation, but just being able to listen for sounds and close one's eyes, again, as long as it's safe, and just focus on hearing and bring ourselves back into this very moment and into our bodies right now to help us regulate.
Talk a little bit about how what you're describing in terms of getting present through sensory experience in the moment and in one's body is different from distraction.
I love this question. Thank you for asking this. It's a lot about the sort of frame around it. So sometimes the activity might be exactly the same, but how we frame it makes all the difference. I can't handle this. I have to distract myself to get away from this moment or this experience is distraction. Mindfully shifting our attention is, ooh, boy, yuck. I don't like what's going on right now. I am uncomfortable, but not dangerous. I don't have to focus on this thing right now that's making me uncomfortable. What else can I focus on while I'm waiting for my body to calm itself down, while I'm waiting for my brain to cool off, right? So it's just about the frame. And you might be watching a little show while you're cooling off, but it's not, oh, my kid's anxious, they can't handle it. Here's the iPad. It's, oh, looks like you're feeling pretty anxious right now. That looks really uncomfortable. I can see it. I can see it. What can you do to calm yourself down? Let's take a few deep breaths. Mind is feeling really busy. I hear that. What can we do with your minds right now that's going to help you not be so caught in this thought because it's not dangerous right now? You don't have to think this at this very moment. And so that's the shift.
It's so good. Because one is an acknowledgement and a slowing down. I mean, I felt it just in the whole way that you described what you just did, right? Which is, oh, I got to solve for this feeling. Here's the screen versus, oh, wow, going through the steps as you just did. And I like my whole nervous system just calmed down. And if you're listening to this at one speed and not faster, probably also, although maybe even at speed, you felt that shift too. That is real. Like, I think going back to what I was saying earlier about like, this is a neurobiological reality in our bodies. Like, this is true for realsies, right? And learning how to engage with our emotional state, with our bodies is, I mean, that's kind of like the biggest thing we're here to learn as human beings, probably. And certainly as parents and educators, the most important thing we can teach the children that we interface with, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And earlier you had mentioned this, that when our kids are upset, we're uncomfortable. One of the hardest things and most important things to deal with as parents, as educators, as other caregivers is tolerating the distress of kids. And it's really important because when your child becomes anxious and you go, oh no, you're anxious. Now I'm anxious as mama. I'm going to give you this thing to calm you down. It's a Band-Aid, right? So you're just putting the Band-Aid on. If you're like, oh no, you're anxious. I'm sorry to hear you're anxious. I'm here with you. I can handle this feeling with you. Something very different happens. The feeling gets less scary for your kid and for you as the parent, which is huge, right? That's the neosporin on the boo-boo, right? That's not just the Band-Aid covering it. That's the thing that's then leading to the healing itself.
Yeah. And yet, trying to do that sometimes can feel very, very scary. And our own brains will send us signals that is a very dangerous thing to do. And I think particularly with anybody with a history of trauma, anybody with a history of a parent who did not behave in ways that were predictable, that often gets kicked up in these moments, right? Where our own children are dysregulated. Now we're trying to be the parent to our own dysregulated child and like ourselves as that dysregulated child, but then also our offspring. And it gets very confusing very quickly.
This is true. This is true. And this is why I'm constantly encouraging parents, be gentle with yourself, be compassionate towards yourself. This is hard. This is practice. This is imperfect. It's practice the whole time. Like when your kids are 40, you're still practicing. Like it doesn't stop being practice, right? There is no perfect parent. You're not going to get it right every time. Any step in the right direction is a step in the right direction, right? And so that's really important for parents to recognize. And even if you just take the moment to regulate yourself so that you don't fly off the handle in the face of your child's big emotion, that's a win. All of it, all of these are steps in the right direction.
If people want to find out more about you and find out more about the books, how do they do that?
Sure. So my website is drdanielaowen.com. Really simple, just drdanielaowen.com. And the books are on there. There is information to message me through there. You can contact me about my practice through there. I am also I am starting a parenting program. It's in the final pilot stage right now, focused on resilience in children and helping parents to raise resilient children. And so there's information about that up there, and that's going to be something that in the future parents can sign up for. So if you want some more information about any of that, the website is probably the easiest, best way to get that. But the books are on Amazon as well, so you can just look them up.
Fantastic. Okay, we will link to all of that in the show notes. And Daniela Owen, thank you so much for writing these books and being willing to take the call from the publisher.
Oh, my pleasure. I know it was fortuitous. It really was.
Yeah.
Really was.
And for being here today. I know that people will really get the books, you guys. They're really, really good. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.